What a great set of speakers. I have to say that this was really, really great. So thank you. And I start asking questions, but I would like the audience to communicate as well. And it is quite difficult for me to look at the chat. So please raise your hands and I will try to also elaborate your questions then to our discussion. So first of all, I would like to start with Sidharth. I love your fresh thinking and questioning. I think it was really, really great. And I think that sometimes we are thinking very traditionally and we do things like we have always done. So I think that your questioning was very, very right. But what do you think? Will large language models eventually make structured data capture obsolete? Will that happen eventually?
It's a really good question, and I would like to know the answer to it as well. So I don't know, and we can just make guesses with what we have today. And it's really hard to predict these things because it may just be a breakthrough around the corner that makes something like infinite context windows and infinite memory possible. And then we don't know what the landscape will look like. So I would definitely say while we are looking into our own, like the day-to-day and going through structured data, the modeling of the everyday, we also need to keep a check on technology progressing as a whole and make sure that we are not completely left behind as things run along.
Yeah, so that we are not old-fashioned in our thinking. What do you think companies, especially small companies, startups, are often asking from me that how could we get access to patient data so that we could build applications, we could test applications, and it's sort of a hindering thing in the application development. So what do you think? Could we use generative AI actually to build and produce synthetic openEHR-based data?
Great question. And in fact, as part of the HIMED project, they wanted something very similar where they are able to generate example data for the German core FHIR profiles. So what we actually ended up doing was that, again, generative AI is even not mature as it is today to generate this good looking synthetic data, right? It's not just about its ability, but it's also about cost. It's super expensive to generate that amount of synthetic data using something like Gen AI. So using a tool like Cynthia is just much easier. And in fact, we
Okay.
were even taking a look at if Cynthia could be used with openEHR, because the internal data models were all like very well modeled and so on. And can Cynthia have an openEHR based output? And Cynthia is already doing a great job at exporting FHIR resources. So in this case, it's just easier to use a tool like Cynthia with these workflow builders. And maybe Gen AI can help in coming up with these workflows. So Cynthia comes up with these realistic workflows. For someone with cold, they first go to the doctor, then they get these symptoms, then they get this diagnosis, then they get this treatment. Gen AI can help in generating those artifacts. And that's again like what I'm seeing again and again. It's good at generating these artifacts. In the data itself, it's super expensive.
Yeah. I think that we should do a lot more to help these little companies, small and middle-sized companies, to start adopting openEHR, and that would be a great idea to go into this synthetic data space as well. Graham, it was really, really nice when you talked about this portable mapping. So could I order some portable mappings? I think I would be the first customer. Great. What do you think, Graham? Could you ever see openEHR technology being added to FHIR resources? So as an example, an AQL resource to allow openEHR queries and maybe possibly returning FHIR content?
I don't know AQ well enough to discuss the detailed technical stuff off the top of my head. But in principle, those are the kind of things that we could be exploring. And yeah, I can see some challenges, but it seems like that could be overcome. Just the ones that I know about. We would be interested in exploring that possibility. One of the things I've learned is that there is a lot less drive to standardize query languages than there is. No, that's not right. There is a lot of functional reasons why query language communities become very balkanized. And within the community, you get a high drive for consistency and a high resistance to harmonizing with other query language communities. So, for instance, in HL7, we formed CQL, and they're never going to change. The CQL people, they've got their path, they're going to stick with it. But there's a bunch of people in HL7 who hate CQL and will never use it, and are doing other query languages. So why not add another to mix? Will be fine.
What about opening up the SNOMED CT licensing? Could we collaborate in that? So to build a stronger joint content design between FHIR and openEHR communities. You talked a lot about terminology bindings. So it would be ideal to have native SNOMED constraints in archetypes and resources instead of these local codes. Would we be stronger together to push SNOMED CT?
Well, so several things. We only define the local codes when there's spaces that SNOMED would not go. So we define local codes for protocols and interoperability things, but our stated policy is that we don't define meaningful codes. We work with LOINC and SNOMED and RxNorm and others to do that. But of course, that's a problem because they're all balkanized in their own ways geographically. And SNOMED CT has a licensing issue that holds us back. And so our current policy is that we don't specify SNOMED CT in international specifications, but that's changed recently because we do for IPS, and they are adding codes by our request to GPS, which are free for use, and so we can specify GPS-based value sets, but that is still very early in development. SNOMED CT have told me that they want to develop that further, and that there's certainly noises around that the licensing model is going to change, but we, as much as possible, would like to work with SNOMED CT around these things. And so can we do it together? Well, I mean, if in as much as the openEHR community adopts the FHIR technology ecosystem, then that would absolutely drive us to be doing those things together, because we will be sharing the same value sets, and it's at the value set level that we engage in the discussion between the users and the providers of the terminology. And since I am speaking and someone just asked the question, has the collaboration started yet? The answer is no. There is an idea in the air, and there may be some meetings next year. Keep your ears pierced, my ears peeled, not pierced, but ears peeled. And Rachel and I are having a bit of a chat about some of these things. That's Rachel Dunscombe, the CEO of openEHR. Yeah. But I'll leave further statements to Rachel to make.
Yeah. Is Markus here still? Yep.
Yes, good to see you, Hanna.
Yeah, you try to hide. Hey, a straight question. has openEHR a role in European health data space? What is your thinking around it? I know that Sitra is pushing openEHR in Finland, and I'm very, very glad about that. So I think it's a good foundation for the data strategies. But how about the bigger picture, European health data space?
Well, not directly, because in the European health data space, the EU has powers only for the internal market, for the single market, and that includes for example, the product standards, so including the exchange format between the EHRs and so on. But when it comes to the openEHR, as Graham was showing the picture, where the openEHR is strongest, it's when in the content management and on the care side, on the care provision, and making that as good as it can be with the rich data. I think that is then in how the member states and the EU have competencies is on the competencies of the member state side. The EU does not have competencies of how a member state organize their healthcare systems and how the healthcare provision is delivered. And I think that's where the openEHR is at its strongest. So the ESDS does not even try to go into that sphere. So that's why it doesn't directly force how the data is stored permanently. And so the persistence of data is not the question, but it's the exchange formats mainly. So that's where the FHIR standard, for example, is stronger, and the European health data space regulation, it presents this European electronic health record exchange format, and for that there will be implementation guidelines and what standards it can be implemented and so on. So I would say that most likely those standards, the implementation guidelines, will be based on the CDA or FHIR. Perhaps there could be an openEHR based exchange standard as well. But as was described, I think we all agree that the openEHR is more strong in other points than in the exchange directly. So that's why there is no direct sort of impact there. But of course, if you build sort of the exchange, you need to build the extraction of data from the EHR system. Now, if the EHR system is openEHR based, then of course there will be impact for all the community. You need to build the extraction from the data for the exchange format. And once you build it as a community, it will be available for all of you. So basically it's implemented once then for the openEHR. And I think that's something that you should take a look at when the specification will be published in 26.
And I think that if we get these portable mappings that Graham was promising, then this will be also very nice for the European health data space and the openEHR-based electronic health records. So if I understood correctly now, when we talk about European health data space exchange format, it is not really existing yet. So no recommendation specifications, because this is something that vendors are asking for. So that is really on its way still. Still one question to you, Markus, now when you are there. So European health data space is set to adapt to unique cultural and regional contexts of different European countries. So how will building of European health data space adjust then to different maturity levels when we talk about data sharing in different member states?
I think it's a very fair question, and of course a lot of the countries are in very different situation in digitalization in general, but I think that is why the transition periods are also quite long. So that was one of the negotiation results. The member state negotiated themselves in the council, and then the parliament members negotiated in the parliament, and they pushed back quite a lot on the transition periods. The initial periods from the European Commission proposal in 2022 were very strict, but now the member state pushed the transition periods to 4, 6, and 10 years. So that is now the estimation that the member state can actually manage to implement the necessary information systems within that timeline. But of course, some countries have much more to do than others regarding the maturity.
Would Nordic countries be like role models for that? Because we have a lot of openEHR and FHIR hand in hand, and in Finland, HL7 Association is actually openEHR International's member, and so on. Is this something that could be foreseen?
Yes, of course, this is already happening. So, for example, Finland, as I wrote to the chat, that Finland and Estonia are already exchanging data, but that is on a voluntary basis, and the ESDS will make that mandatory between all countries. The Finnish Innovation Fund is coordinating the DATAS 2, which is building the specifications, but we are also coordinating a project in the Nordic countries called VALO, Value from Nordic Health Data. And in that, we are actually tracking how the Nordic countries are preparing for the ESDS and what is their roadmap for implementation. So most likely we will be the front runners also in the implementation, and we can then lead the way for the rest of the Europe. Perhaps we will implement it even before the implementation timelines are, that we have the deadlines for the implementation. So perhaps others could then look at the Nordic countries and take example from that.
Yeah, building Nordic data space inside European health data space. Sidharth, what is the role of generative AI and large language models in the health IT space? It's a big question, and Sidharth has disappeared.
Yeah, I'm
Sidharth?
back. Can you hear me?
Yes, I cannot see you, but...
Okay. Yeah, I think, it's as far as what we're seeing right now, it seems to be that we're converting unstructured data to structured artifacts. Now it's the job of modelers and all the people here like Graham and regulatory people like Marcus to make sure that these artifacts are modeled right. Like once that's done, then the conversion from unstructured into this would be much easier, right?
Yeah. So with generative AI, we can create fresh new content or data from the existing data set. So, for example, clinical data repository. So please give a simple example to our audience. We have a clinician in an open ecosystem. So how could this clinician see generative AI? What kind of applications he could have? So that this gets a little bit more tangible.
Yeah. I think we're seeing this already, right? Like we're seeing this already, and there are so many applications in the US which are already doing this. You don't need to look at your computer while you're talking to a patient. Just talk to your patient, and the system will listen to your conversation, and it will understand what you are talking about. And the practitioner can maybe give in some comments now and then in the middle that, oh, okay, just note this down. Just like you're talking to somebody who's sitting down remotely and taking down notes for you. You just don't need that cost anymore. You don't need that person there live listening to you. It could just be a local LLM model running on your own local premise, and it has the capacity to document for you, right? And if we are seeing this go a little bit further, then we are just starting to see more and more of people can just talk to the EHR. You don't need to interact with it the same way that you do. You can just be like, pull up this particular thing, and it just shows you there. And it's interesting to see the how this merges with AR and VR, because we are seeing a different kind of interface with the computing world. It may not just be keyboards and mouses and monitors anymore. So that changes things a lot as well.
So this could be part of the wow effects that we have been discussing in this masterclass, that we need to give wow effects to the clinicians so that they buy in this new approach to data-driven healthcare. So we can probably utilize this. Graham, Australia and the recent developments in your data modeling in Australia, they have been like a hot topic in LinkedIn very recently. And I would like to ask a little bit about your initiative. So you have modeled open-air-based data sets nationally, then you use FHIR, you use mapping from open-air to FHIR. How did you end up modeling the national data sets with open-air in Australia? How did that come?
So I'm in open-air, and I forgot to say, all these people are my friends, been friends for a long time. And I mean, there was a lot of Australian leadership and a lot of Australian comfort with the open-air approach at the community level, and a lot of experience with it because of that. And so it was always, a candidate, and we wanted community assessment. I'm not sure that the process will remain open-air centric. I think to a degree we're moving away from that and looking at US CDI as a model, but we won't be stopping using open-air CKM community consultation. Also, some of the key players who have come across from the open-air community to work on the Australian process have, their own comfort and experience with the open-air process. But from my point of view, any tool that helps people understand what you're talking about is a useful thing to have when it comes to community consultation. Doing this right, getting people, herding the cats, getting people to understand and people to agree. That's the actual hard part of all of this. And if it helps with that, then great.
Yeah. There is one question that was sent to me regarding this Australian thing, and then after that I will give the word to you, Kishore. Given that the Australian FHIR core dataset is based on open-air archetypes for the information modeling, can FHIR accommodate open-air artifacts in its envelope natively? A little bit techie question.
Well, I mean, no, unfortunately. Even though they're conceptually aligned and conceptually based on it, there's a manual. I talked about the manual conversion process. Well, there's a manual conversion process. The goal is to get away from the manual conversion processes, but for now, that's where we are.
Yeah.
Okay. Kishore, please. Your hand was raised. Maybe you can also have your picture here.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Good evening, all.
Yep.
Yes, sir. So thank you all. It's like an good, informative, and knowledgeable session. So I have few queries about openEHR, and recently we have we have an ecosystem, and we have built that maybe 15 years back, and we are continuously using the same EMR system. Now, recently we are trying to modernize that with the using of openEHR. So what's happening is, in my understanding, the openEHR will drive me through the templates, like say suppose whereas maybe if the patient is coming in, there is a basic information I need to track from the patient, so there will be a standard template to that one. Like say suppose I need to collect some vitals from the patient. There is some basic vitals like a patient's temperature, SpO2, and then blood pressures, or any standard height and weight for that the pediatric patient. So what there, I find it very difficult. Like say, suppose there is an example of the patient is coming with a knee pain. So there should be a template to the doctor, to a standard set of questionnaires to continue the flow. So that the data should be like an template driven. That's what my understanding was there, that openEHR. But unfortunately, it become very difficult for me to create a standard basic templates itself, because I had to take each archetype separately and to create that one, and it is causing huge development and huge data increase in the system compared to that what we have developed in 15 years back. Is that maybe my apologies, is that my understanding is wrong, or is there any alternative is available for that?
Is it Sidharth?
Yeah, I could try and answer this question. So some of the confusion arises when people try to just port over an existing information system exactly on top of openEHR by trying to capture all the data fields that are present in the previous system in openEHR again. And I do agree that, for example, let's take a questionnaire that's meant to capture the condition of knee pain. Maybe you have some specific set of questions that you want to ask the patient. This may not already be available in openEHR as an archetype, because this may be a questionnaire that was specifically modeled for your workflow, right? So in this case, there are two ways to think about this. The first way is that when you are looking at archetypes, look at the more generic kind of archetypes. So there are archetypes that are available for, and again, is Ian also here in this? Okay.
Ian.
So yeah, probably
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. So more of an expert when it comes to the data modeling side of things. But these archetypes, you don't need to template all of them in the template itself. There are some application level modeling that you could do as well. So for example, I think, Ian, what would you use, for example, for something like a screening questionnaire?
Yeah, exactly. So there's, I won't go into this in depth because this will be a whole session, and Graham needs to go to his bed. So yeah,
I never sleep, Ian.
Yeah, I know that. There is this problem of there are two speech patterns in health. There's the kind of, if you like, there's the imperative where you say you have diabetes, but there's also the question. And that's what you get in a GP system. You get a problem list where the patient has diabetes, they have asthma, they have heart failure as statements of fact. But then you get the flip where you get does the patient have diabetes? Yes, no. And we fought with this for years to try and find an elegant way. And really just the breakthrough was to say, no, we just have to accept that is a different way of expressing an answer. And very often they don't have the same force. There's a big difference between somebody saying, do they have diabetes? Yes, no, which could be a junior member of staff or even a patient, against the patient has diabetes. So it is legitimate. And I would suggest what you do is have a look at those procedure. There's a whole list of screening questionnaire archetypes and CKM that are quite helpful for those yes, no type questions. And keep the imperative ones for where you have an actual diagnosis or a confirmed record of a procedure to trigger decision support. That's me.
Thank you, Ian. I hope this was clear enough to answer the question. Finally, I would like to ask about the governmental leadership in open standards adoption. This is it has been discussed in all our master classes, and I think this is the key. Whether it is openEHR, whether it is FHIR, whether it is OMOP, how can we get the governmental leadership in this adoption? So how could we get more national support? And maybe Markus, you could look at it from the European Health Data Space point of view. Is European Health Data Space the key to force ministries think about open platforms with these three different open standards? So maybe Markus, you start, and then I would like to have Sidharth and Graham to comment on this topic as well.
I think the European Health Data Space is such a huge effort for all countries that they need to also think about the larger strategic things on the digitalization for health. And I think at this same strategic discussion, we should take these open standards, we should take the data models in question. So not just look into what the European Health Data Space directly the implementation needs, but how to make it so that it benefits the healthcare at large. And I think that's the debate where the openEHR and where the OMOP and the FHIR really are the larger discussion. So not just to focus on what the regulation directly requires, but how we should build our healthcare systems and how we could benefit from the data most. And we try to push this, especially in Finland, where we are located. So we will publish on actually 22nd of this month. We will make a publication which includes the openEHR and OMOP, and we try to explain to the society how to benefit from those. But I think we need that discussion in all member states, but not only member states, also in regional level and organizational level. So, but the main punchline would be that do not just look at the regulation and see what we directly need to implement in that, but how your organization, your region, or your country can benefit from health data and take it from there.
Sidharth, how is it in India? And if you want to comment other countries as well, how can we get the national support? Do you have the national support in this space?
We do. We have a national program which is again based on FHIR. It's FHIR Document Exchange. And what has actually happened is that I do see a sort of an anti-pattern here, which is the FHIR national profile had a few data elements, and they asked, okay, we want these data elements to be exchanged. But people just stopped there. And there was no proper mechanism for extending other structured data models to go through. And you kind of have this bottleneck at the national level, which on what data models can be exchanged. And I think we're seeing this with the US core to some extent as well. And I can only agree with what Marcus had to say, which is the national profiles or the national standard should act as a framework on top of which we can do a lot more, and at least like conform to the national formats. But yeah, it's not really ideal the way it has been done here in India.
How about Australia? It took a while, and now I can see that there is a strong national support in this with openEHR, FHIR, all mappings, etc. You made it? Any advice to the others?
Thing to keep in mind from the government bureaucrats' perspective, open standards are a tough proposition. They need political support for ceding control to the community over timelines more than anything else. But it's really difficult for a government department to say to the minister, no, because the open process won't support that. And so everybody who's talking to the government about open standards has to start with that understanding. It's a hard proposition to take to the minister, to take to the political decision maker, the funder, and everybody wants funding. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. It's a tough proposition. It requires patience and it requires sustained engagement. But if you do, and this is what we finally managed to sell to the minister in Australia when we got a new minister who was amenable to the discussion. If you make that investment, if you build the capacity, if you build the community, then it stops being no and it starts becoming yes. You can have what you want cheaper and quicker and faster than doing it through the classic government ways, but you have to build that over a sustained period of time. And I think that those of us and I totally do believe in open standards, part of that journey here in Australia was me and a few others coming to understand why that was such a hard proposition and getting a minister who's prepared to build over a 10-year period and who recognises that we have no choice but to fix the broken things in the healthcare system. But as long as the department thinks that its process is business as usual, it's really hard to convince them to make that leap. But the great thing to look at is the United States. The government in the United States is fundamentally constrained in ways that the European governments are not. And so they think long and hard about how to achieve their goals in the presence of those constraints, which is actually a really good and healthy thing for a department to go through. And it's worth looking at the sustained success of the US program built on that sustained investment in capacity and trust in the open standards process. But like I said, it takes time.
Yeah, and I think that we have to build awareness about openEHR, about FHIR, about all open standards also on the political decision-making level. And I think it was lovely to see that in the Parliament of England there was a speech about separating data from applications just recently. So yeah, some green light is seen in the tunnel. So I thank you. I thank Sidharth. I thank Markus.